So, guys, I want to talk about AEW All In, and I have my handy dandy notebook, and I'm gonna tell you major pitches for AEW All In. So, the first thing that I want to say is that this is definitely a very important show for the company. I'd say that this is the most important show that they have because this really dictates the direction of AEW for the rest of the year and definitely the peak of the summer months. And the other thing about that is the key word, the P word. It's not poontang pie, something we all enjoy. It's actually pivot for AEW. Can you pivot from Moxley being the champion, and then also too that they need to set up other divisions and they need to set up their future really. And I would always really would say that with WWE, they used to have Money in the Bank, and they used to do the Andre the Giant Battle Royale. So sometimes, as Pablo Picasso says, great artists steal, good artists borrow. So there are some things that they can do to elevate the show really. That I really think they need to set up a really great direction with the show. And then also too that in my opinion they should have 12 matches including the pre-show, because obviously for WrestleMania you want something to be epic. This needs to feel like a WrestleMania event, and this needs to show to the fans that AEW is going in a great direction. So in no particular order, I want to talk about my pitches, what should be accomplished at that show. The first thing I have on my list is Dustin Rhodes and the Von Erich boys need to defend the ROH Trios titles. That this could be on the pre-show 100%. And you could even do the Death Riders, Shane Taylor Promotions, the Frat House, and LFI. And the reason why I say Shane Taylor Promotions, because Shane Taylor, I feel like he's extremely underrated. He does have a really great voice. So, you know what, definitely just try to build them up. Or you can even do Crew or whatever. One of the teams that usually lose, but you're going to get popped because, these are the bad guys against the good guys. You can even extend that if you want to give the titles to a group. You can have the Death Riders, or you can even have, LFI, because you got to, have LFI win some titles eventually. And then you have, Dustin Rhodes, you have Kevin Von Erich, and then you also have, Jake the Snake Roberts. So I think that would be the better match, really, because then you have, these three legends. They're not going to be around that much longer, really, So you can do something like that. So I would say that would be my first thing. This is also in Texas. So do you want the Von Erichs? Kevin Von Erich, the man from Texas. Dustin Rhodes, baby, the American dream, baby. The son of a plumber, baby. Do you want his son defending the ROH titles, baby? That makes a lot of sense to do that. So that's gonna be my first pitch. The next pitch that I have on my list is rebuild the women's division, and I've said this many times that there are a couple of matches that they should have. In my opinion, they should not have the men's casino ladder match, because I know they do that at Double or Nothing. Now they're doing that at All In. They should have the women's tag team. They should have a women's tag team tournament, and then you have the finals at AEW All In. Or one of my suggestions is that you take a bunch of women's tag teams, you introduce these women over the next couple of weeks, and you have 20 people, so 10 teams, and you do over the ropes match. So if both your tag team partners go over the ropes really, then actually you're eliminated. So you can have 6 women from 16. You can have 4 teams from Ring of Honor, 4 teams from Collision, 4 teams from Dynamite, and then you have these people talk. You have these people have matches with each other through the next 7 weeks really, and then you're like, hey, you know what? We're gonna do the over the rope thing, and now you build up these characters. So people say, hey, look at all these 20 women in the women's division. There are other matches too. Willow Nightingale versus Marina Shafir should be a street fight. There's a talk of Thunder Rosa versus Britt Baker for a hair versus hair match. Why not, really? Thunder Rosa's done a lot for the company. Britt Baker's been kind of a bitch, bigger bitch than Kyle's mom. So why not do that? You should be doing Mercedes Moné versus Toni Storm. I'm okay with that. Willow Nightingale definitely deserves a match on this show. Even if you did an intergender match, you did something like Marina Shafir and Gabe Kidd versus Willow Nightingale and, maybe Eddie Kingston or something like that. I think that's one of my big pitches, that Willow Nightingale deserves a match. on this card really. But these are ways to rebuild the women's division. You give them like you give the women like 3 or 4 matches, and you do something with that. The next thing that I would say, and this is probably the main thing on my list, is that for Forbidden Door, it should be Hangman, Will Ospreay, and Swerve Strickland for the AEW Championship, and they can set that up with Swerve and Ospreay helping out Hangman Adam Page, and he rewards them by giving them a triple threat match. I think that's the best thing you can do for AEW Forbidden Door. That'd be something that people would want to see. It adds to a bunch of unpredictability, and then also you don't have Jon Moxley in the main event really. So I think that would be the best thing. And the way that I would do that, and I'll spoil a little bit, is that you have Hiroshi Tanahashi versus Will Ospreay at Forbidden Door. You open the show with that match, and then because Tanahashi wants to retire with Will Ospreay, and Ospreay gives into his emotions and says, "Hey, I'm gonna do double duty." And then what you do is that you have, I think like you can have Swerve and Hangman pin Ospreay, and you can give them a storyline where it's Swerve versus Hangman in a steel cage at All Out. And then Ospreay kind of goes on a redemption arc. Like he's kind of like, you know what, maybe I'm too nice really. And then maybe he gets some motivation by the Hurt Syndicate about like maybe joining them, you know, like having that killer instinct, you know. So it could be like Ospreay's debating with his heart, you know, is he just too much of a nice person, and goes down a dark path but gets back on that path. And then next year you do Wembley Stadium with Ospreay versus Hangman, and Ospreay almost goes to the darkness, but he sees the light in the short and sees the light within a period of a year. So I think that would be what you do. The next thing that I would say is that Darby Allin wins the AEW contract match. And what I mean by that is that there's called Contract for the Gold, if I'm correct. And that's a match where people climb ladders, and the winner of that receives a contract. Anytime, anywhere you win an AEW match contract. And what you have to do is 2 things. That first of all, Darby Allin makes the most sense because you can kind of like, you can do a storyline where he feels a little entitled or better than everybody else. So you have like that arrogant streak. He's one of the 4 pillars, so it makes a lot of sense to build him up really, and he's ready to be a heavyweight champion. And I think, like as I said, he's more of a Money in the Bank type of winner champion. Like, you know, again, as I said, like Samoa Joe versus Darby Allin doesn't look good on paper, or somebody like you know, if you had Wardlow as a champion, you know, Darby Allin's a smaller guy really. So I really think that the way to put the title on him is that you give him the AEW contract match. And that's the best thing to do, really, because obviously you can set up a feud between him and Moxley over that, because Moxley keeps sabotaging him. There's stuff that you can do, really. But I think that then, because also you need to have successful cash-ins. You don't want to do the TNA wrestling thing where Feast or Fired, or a lot of times a lot of people lost when they held that Feast or Fired briefcase, and it was for the heavyweight championship. So I think that would be good to show that means something, but also gives Darby Allin something, you know, build him up as one of the 4 pillars. The next match that I would say is, the next pitch I would say is that Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston need to become a feud. If not, do it with Mark Briscoe. But Eddie Kingston versus Jon Moxley is the direction that they need to go in, because this will give Jon Moxley something to do. And this will also keep him out of the heavyweight championship picture, because, you know, as we've said, that we need to pivot. It's not drawing money. You know what? This needs to feel like a WrestleMania level show. You're also having WWE, you know, book some shows around this event, really. So you need to kind of say, hey, you know, what do you want? Do you want some good live event? Do you want some good, you know, premium live events? Or do you want a WrestleMania level show done by AEW? And we're going to have a new champion. It's going to do everything to make this show optimistic. Or are we going to like stick with Jon Moxley, where it's been hurting things, been criticized. They've dropped maybe around 20-30% viewership over the couple of months. You know, ever since Samoa Joe gained the trios titles, and there's been seeds of doubt around Moxley being a champion with the way that things are being booked, it would kind of make sense to be like, hey, you know what? Our upward momentum is Jon Moxley not benefiting from this, really. You know, so I would say that 100%, you know, put Jon Moxley, pivot from Jon Moxley, give him a feud with Eddie Kingston, you know, like, and that could be, you know, that could be something really, you know, him and Jon Moxley would lead to a good match. The next pitch that I have is the ROH men's title and the ROH women's title should be defended at AEW All In. And if I was in WWE, that would be one thing that I would say to Triple H, Nick Khan, and Stephanie McMahon. That nice piece of ass, really. Stephanie McMahon, sexy bitch. I like that those women with power. Damn, she's a beautiful, take no nonsense type of bitch, really. So, to get back to it, and damn, I just like women with power, really. That's why, Stephanie McMahon, she's one of those. She's a very, very sexy woman, she can boss me around and tell me what to do, anytime, anytime she wants. So, with that said, I believe that it's always a good idea to do this, that in WWE, the NXT title should always be defended at WrestleMania. Why do I say that? Because that actually elevates people who hold the NXT championship. It says, look at our future generation, really. So what would happen if one year you had Trick Williams, that whipped that trick like pandemonium? What if you had that at a WrestleMania? What would happen if you had a Bray Wyatt or Roman Reigns or Adam Cole, baby, and all those other things, at a WrestleMania? So it kind of sets up a wrestler really strongly if they are holding the NXT champion and they defend that at a WrestleMania. What would happen if you take the ROH men's title and you say, okay, well, you look at Bandito. He draws. He's a very big attraction to the Mexican audience. He's a big attraction to a lot of people who are ROH fans. There's not a lot of people who know about him, I think, in a mainstream audience. So what would happen if you do something like Bandito versus Rouge, or Bandito versus like Sammy Guevara, or Bandito versus Max Caster, or Bandito versus somebody else, really, or Bandito versus Hologram, because Holograms are getting a great reception, really, or Bandito versus Chris Jericho, or Bandito versus Big Bill. Like, there's stuff that you can do with this, or Bandito versus Nick Wayne, which could be a really great match. So like, and it elevates Bandito to say, hey, you're not on like a secondary show. Check out Ring of Honor. Let's see what Ring of Honor can be. So there's something to be said about that. Before I miss this, and I didn't write this down, is there should be Nick Wayne versus Christian Cage. I think that you can't really speed up, because I think their plan was to Christian Cage and Edge versus Nick Wayne and somebody else. I think that's what they're trying to do, but they don't have time to do that, and that doesn't make no sense. So Nick Wayne versus Christian Cage, that would be a really great match. Build up your next generation. There's a lot of people saying that Nick Wayne's putting in his dues. So you can set up something where Christian forces him to defend his title in Mexico, do all this stuff, and not respect them. It leads to a match. Maybe backstage he slaps Nick Wayne, he misses, and then he slaps his mother. It leads to a great match. Mama Wayne's gonna get the MILF chance, and again, she's very beautiful. Mama Wayne looks like Stevie Nicks, so another woman that's beautiful, sexy, takes no shit from nobody, and can lead to something. So if Mama Wayne needs anybody to boss around, I'm that man, really. So again, that's another thing too. In addition to the ROH men's title, you have the ROH. You have Nick Wayne versus Christian Cage. There's story within that. There's multi-year story. You can do something with that. The ROH women's title, like, Athena is about to be a 1,000-day champion. I think that eventually she has to drop her title. That should be at Final Battle, the latest. But again, like I've said, it doesn't really matter her 1,000 days or whatever, really, because most people don't, like, as I said, I was at the Hammerstein Ballroom. There were people outside saying, Ember Moon, Athena. I did not know. There's some people who do not know that she's even alive. I know some people thought that she was dead because nobody knows about her 1,000-day reign, really, So, like I've said many times, validate her. She's almost at 1,000 days. You got to celebrate that. You got to make that a big deal. So what would happen if you did something like, say, hey, we're going to have, Taya Valkyrie versus Athena. And the reason why you do that is because you have John Morrison, a WWE guy that people recognize. What would happen if you decided to have Queen Aminata or Marina Shafir or Megan Bain or the Toxic Spider or a few other, like, people who could be your next generation, Chris Statlander, or maybe Willow Nightingale, who could be a good ROH women's match. I think that elevates that title really. That says, hey, that it matters. Um, because they seriously need to revamp ROH and ring and ROH and you have to kind of elevate it a bit. And also, like in the show, say, hey, ROH does matter. Check out ROH, and we're gonna start to build this up really. The next match that they should do is Anthony Bowens versus Max Caster. Once again, there's so much history between Anthony Bowens and Max Caster. They could do a street fight or a Texas death match, or or something really big and epic, really. Because I do think like a squash match is not good. You can set up these ambush, and like the way I would have booked this is what you have Anthony Bowens beat Okada, and then you have another match where Anthony Bowens beats Okada, but Max Caster causes an interference, and then Anthony Bowens is super pissed, like his goal is to win a title, a singles title, and Max Caster fucked him over. And then you have at Mexico Ring of Honor, you have Bandito versus Max Caster. You have Max Caster diss the Mexican audience. And he gets close. He actually pins Bandito. Anthony Bowens fucks him over. You lead to their match at AEW All In. And even if it's a steel cage or something like that, you lead to that. So, because they can have like a good 20, 30-minute match. And their story, there's so much stuff that you can build. And like AEW struggles with story really. So you can kind of have like this one match where they know each other is coming, and they're not about each other's success really. So I think that would be the best way to go. And you can set up a match like Billy Gunn versus Max Caster over the next couple of weeks and have him retire Billy Gunn if he doesn't plan to wrestle anymore. So there's a lot of there's a lot of things you can do with like Max Caster versus Anthony Bowens. You can even have Anthony Bowens win, or like do a double, do something where they both like knock each other out really, or even have Max Caster win to kind of like have Anthony Bowens doubt himself. But at the end of the year, he becomes the TNT champion. So I think Anthony Bowens versus Max Caster should be a really great pitch. Kyle Fletcher becomes the TNT champion, and this is something that I really want to see for two reasons. That Kyle Fletcher got some heat on him. Let's take advantage of that. The other thing about Kyle Fletcher is that he's at the point where he needs to win an AEW championship, and Adam Cole hasn't been really doing anything. So you should do something like have Kyle Fletcher be on Collision, defend that title for 4 or 5 months really. See what he can do. Can he elevate the title? Is he going to be talked about? And then if he does that, eventually when you have Will Ospreay become the AEW champion, you can have him feud with Kyle Fletcher. Or next year you have Kyle Fletcher win Gauntlet of Gold. Will Ospreay becomes champion, and eventually Kyle Fletcher takes it away from him. Or maybe Kyle Fletcher take it away from him at Wembley Stadium. Kyle Fletcher is the champion, and then Will Ospreay and him have like a blood feud, and you do like the final chapter of that. But this all starts with Kyle Fletcher being the TNT champion, because you say to yourself, okay, Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher, that's over, or that's going to be on a back burn for a couple of years. We're not going to turn that into John Cena versus Randy Orton. The next thing is where it's like done to death, really. And then the next part of it is that you see what Kyle Fletcher can do with the TNT Championship. Can he elevate it? Will he be talked about? What feuds can he do? What can Don Callis do for him as people going up against the heel faction? There's a lot of things that they can do. And then, as I said, the end of the year should be at AEW World's End, Kyle Fletcher versus Anthony Bowens, and then you make Anthony Bowens the TNT champion, and then you see what Anthony Bowens can do for the next couple months. So it's really almost like the title that people have when they're about to become the AEW champion, just like with the Intercontinental title back in the day, where that was kind of used for people to see what they can do and see if they can be AEW champion one day. So I think that would be a great usage of the title. It's not been relevant ever since Christian Cage and Edge, really. So that way they can put it in a good direction. The next pitch that I have is that I want to see two things: the Don Callis family versus the Hurt Syndicate, because the Hurt Syndicate needs reasonable opponents, and one big problem is that they need to rebuild the tag team division, and you can't have the Outrunners. You just did the Sons of Texas. There's not a lot of big babyface teams, so why not just do the Don Callis family and make the Hurt Syndicate a bunch of tweeners for right now, really. So, like you said, you can do Josh Alexander and Konosuke Takeshita. That's a good usage of them. You don't want to see... I was thinking about the Ops versus the Don Callis family. No, the Ops versus Death Riders is the best option, really, because they have like a history. They have a blood feud with each other, really. So I think Don Callis family versus the Hurt Syndicate should happen. It should be and that should be MJF and Bobby Lashley versus Inosuke Takashita and Josh Alexander. Like the powerhouse and the great match type against MJF, who's the talker type, and the great match type, and Bobby Lashley's the powerhouse type. That's a great match. The next thing that I will say is that Bobby Lashley and MJF need to defend the tag team titles. You can do something where Sheldon gets attacked by the Don Callis family and MVP as well, really. So you make MJF the tag team champion through the Fabulous Freebird rule. And the reason why you do that is for two reasons. That MJF needs to become a Triple Crown champion, and he also needs to become an AEW Grand Slam champion. He's been doing a great job in the company. He's put in a lot of commitment. I think as somebody who is one of the four pillars, the original four pillars, he really, really needs, in a sense, to actually, be a trios or Grand Slam champion. He's so close to it. He's on the cusp of it. So, why not just give it to him? And then also, too, if you want to do Bobby Lashley versus MJF, which should happen down the road, this is actually them getting closer. This is actually them having trust, really, and then you can go down a direction with this. And then, obviously, with the Hurt Syndicate, you have three people holding the tag team championship. So when MJF becomes a champion, he can still be like a double champion, but not defend the tag team title that much. So because he does have that kind of like that freeloader, work smarter, not harder type of thing. So this would make the most sense, really. And MJF and Bobby Lashley versus, versus the Don Callis family. Takeshita, who's known for Japanese wrestling. Josh Alexander's a TNA guy, has great matches. This automatically does feel like a dream match type of thing. Like, who would think in a million years Bobby Lashley and MJF being on the same team? So this would be a really great match. My next pitch is two things. Capitalize on WWE negativity. That there's a lot of people talking about WWE saying that NXT is trying to be a ripoff of AEW. There's a lot of people being fired from WWE. So you look at all the people who are being fired. You may bring some people in. The next thing that you do is that you make this a WrestleMania level show. And you need to say, hey, you know what? What's WWE giving you that weekend? I think they're doing 3 or 4 PLE. So this has to be like, well, we're going to give you a WrestleMania, really, So let's kind of fight. Let's fight against that. And like with WWE is almost like the stock market, where they're always going to be around. They're always going to have highs and lows, really. And now WWE has been like so overrated, just like AEW. And so now it's kind of going down the decline a little bit. So you have to like say, hey, we're going to have a great show. We're going to pivot, and we're going to work on our biggest weakness, which I'll talk about next, really. So make this your WrestleMania level show. Do the best that you can, because that's going to make you look better than WWE, really. Ride, take advantage of their downward momentum. And then the next thing that I'll say, there's 2 more things. So this is not the main thing, but one of the big things you can do is Chris Jericho versus Big Cass. Many people are talking about that match. Chris Jericho wants to be out of AEW. Why not have him put over Big Cass? And, he's done a lot for the company. He's been their first champion. It's going to help Big Cass if you want to make him and Brian Keith a tag team or something like that. But you have to get to a point of, and it's also a match you want people would look forward to. It's a good use of Chris Jericho. Good send-off to him if he wants to stay with AEW or not. Just give him a final match against Big Cass. He does the honors, and that's that. And I'll throw in another bonus for you guys. You need to set up your new 4 pillars. So the first 4 pillars was Jack Perry, Sammy Guevara, MJF, and Darby Allin. So, like I said, MJF becomes a Grand Slam champion. Eventually faces Adam Page for the AEW championship. He can usually do the Hurt Syndicate versus. You could do something with the Hurt Syndicate in the main event spot. So that's where they should go with the 4 pillars. But your new generation, I would say, is Anthony Bowens, Kyle Fletcher. I would even throw Brody King in that one as well, really, because Brody King has been he's kind of been underutilized. I know he's a little bit older, but I would throw Brody King within that because he has like some charisma about him. And I would also like even put in like Harley Cameron as well, because with Harley Cameron, like she's talked about, you can do like an underdog type of story with her. So that's what I have for four pillars. There's not really a lot of people, but I really think on top of that, like I said, Anthony Bowens and Kyle Fletcher can be something really great. And I'll throw in like a fifth pillar is Powerhouse Hobbs. So those are like your next generation. Anthony Bowens, Kyle Fletcher, Powerhouse Hobbs, Harley Cameron, and Brody King, because Brody King has been like underutilized, a little overlooked, but there's a lot of people who like him. So you need to set up, like your next four pillars, or I would say like the five pillars. The last thing that I would say is build up stories. That one concerning thing about AEW is that you have Fyter Fest. That's a 4-hour show in Denver, Colorado. So the big problem with that is, what are you going to do? Are you going to set up a bunch of matches to AEW All In, or are you just going to have 4 hours of just throwing together matches like it's AEW Dynasty 2025? No, you need to set up feuds. You need to set up stories. You need to like say, hey, this is actually for something. You need to have AEW Portland, Oregon, which I believe is next week, and you need to do a continuation of that. Set up more feuds, set up more stories, set up an organized direction for your show. One bad thing about AEW, and one of the things they struggle with, is storytelling and building up to matches to pay-per-views. You have to learn from WWE. This is where WWE excels, is that in the 2000s, when they had WrestleMania, they did a great job of multiple matches being built over the next couple of weeks, really. Like multiple feuds, multiple stories, tournaments for the Money in the Bank and other things like that. And AEW needs to do the exact same thing. Say the 7 weeks do matter. We're going to build up to this big moment. This is the WrestleMania of AEW. We have to build stories. We have to build matches. It can't be like 3 weeks before then or 2 weeks before then. We're going to build up all the matches. And then you also give AEW Grand Slam in Mexico. And I've said this and I've criticized AEW for this. Why the fuck are you not saying, hey, everybody, we sold out in Mexico. Hey, everybody, we have over 11,000 people going to London. Hey, everybody, we drew over $1 million for our London show. I think close to 2 million. You need to talk about these things to say, hey, AEW does matter in the grand scheme of things. But with AEW Grand Slam Mexico, you can say, hey, the CMLL guys are going to challenge people at AEW All In, because obviously there are people who live in Mexico City who will be flying to Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. So wouldn't it make sense to like use AEW Grand Slam, this really big pivotal moment, to say, hey, you know what, we're actually going to do AEW. We're actually going to like tie that into All In, really. So with your big shows, tie in All In, and also too, like I said, like I think the big thing is that this has to be the biggest deal in the world with them. There's two Tony Khan. There's complacent Tony Khan, and then there's also Tony Khan who's like, okay, you know what, I want to go big. I want to make this things bigger and better. That's the Tony Khan we love and miss, really. When you had All In at Wembley Stadium, yes, there was an audience of people who were seeing AEW for the first time. Wembley Stadium did not have a lot of wrestling shows. The last one was at SummerSlam in the early 90s. But with All In Texas, AEW can sell out 50,000 seats. They can. That has to be their goal. They can do it. They can do it. And it's ultimately giving a fuck. So that's my proposal. These are all these ideas that I have for AEW All In. Tony Khan, sign me to a contract. Sign me to a contract, because I'll make you a bunch of money. And definitely, do well by my favorite wrestler of all time, like Powerhouse Hobbs. Like definitely underrated. And I hope he has a great time with AEW All In. There's so many things that they can do with All In. They have to treat it like a big deal. It really has to be grind time. And then over the next couple of weeks, they can say something like, hey, we have an 18,000 seat setup. Now we have a 21,000. Now we have a 30,000. Now we have a 40,000. Now we have a 50,000. AEW can do it. They have to give a shit. And just remember, the key word is not poontang pie. It's pivot when it comes to AEW. So hopefully they do great by AEW All In.